and I'll get into the presentation here, but I think that in the context of DLab, these things also apply. But no need to scribble this down. If anybody's interested, you can email me. I'll send you the PowerPoint. But the point here is that these are the things that actually make innovative differences that I think really not only impact technology for the Western world, but I think technology going forward for everybody who are not as that don't have as much money. So finally, we get to the main point here of BOP. BOP, I was thrown the topic and going, wow, okay, this is an interesting, wait, how do I scale this? So for those who don't know, the word BOP was actually first used by Franklin Roosevelt in the middle of the Great Depression. And it's quoted here, but basically, the unhappy times call for the building of plans that rest upon the forgotten. The underground, the indispensable units of economic power that built from the bottom up and not from the top down, that put their faith once more in the forgotten man, bottom of the economic pyramid. So the president is giving this in a radio speech during the Great Depression, and basically is stating that we need to and we cannot ignore the bottom of the economic pyramid. And this was actually one of the actual posters used then, and it shows here the well-to-do and the people who actually support that. So in history, since then, over the last 50 years, various governments have spent close to $2 trillion in foreign aid on top-down development regimes. And unfortunately, they have not done so well. And even more lately, in the last year or two, as we all know, the Bretton Woods monetary system management, including things like the IMF, World Bank, and World Trade Organizations, are under a lot of pressure in terms of effectiveness. So, what happened? The private sector took a lot of lead in this most recently, and things like microcredit, microfinancing, words like CSR, sustainability were thrown around, and you had to put it into your quarterly statements and annual reports. So what happened was the first generation BOP was equal profits. Companies went out and goes, okay, we're going to go out and help this, I'm going to make money at this. The problem with this was that when they rushed and went out to capture these huge markets, the perspective of the poor was forgotten or ignored. And so this caused problems where you had companies that had failures or companies that weren't successful. It's understandable why they went this route, though. You look at this slide here, and there are 4 billion people with incomes less than $3,000 per year. I can't even do the division to figure out, how much that is per day. But you can see some of the examples on here, and it's not a lot of money. However, what people went after initially was the total $5 trillion market possibility of this area. So, what happens today that people think about and try to do? So I call this BOP version 2.0, since I come from the high-tech space. First, it's to stop thinking of the poor as victims. Honestly, to really think of them as entrepreneurs. And that they're not customers necessarily today, but middle-class customers of tomorrow. So what a lot of businesses are doing, and it would be great to have people to think in this context, is not to think of them as just consumers and producers, but as business partners. That's one. The other thing is to get outside this concept of selling to the poor to, okay, how do we do a business co-venture with such people? And so, the good example here, and I'm not going to talk about Grameen Bank because everybody knows about Grameen Bank, but I think what Grameen Bank here did, most importantly here, was that it gave access to the very poor with various microfinance capabilities, and they did not do it through the eye of charity, but the main point here is the third bullet point here, which is that the objective of the fund was to empower the poor so that they can get themselves out of poverty. And so it's this is the concept that I hope we can discuss here today in going, it's not a charity, it's how do we help them to get out of it. So one example, of course, is Delight. And now it's like it's changed from the philosophical to the design aspects of this. And we know the D-Light aspects of this, and I was very impressed. And D-Light was actually the first example of D-Lab that I heard, and got me very excited on the background and all these things. So this summarizes many of the points here, and what you'll see in a lot of examples is that there's a specific design goal. There's also a specific outline of what the limitations are to that market. A couple of the other examples that I'll give, because I'm an ICT guy, is how BOP interacts with ICT. And most people think, oh, ICT, cell phones, how can they take advantage of it? But in fact, there have been many, many cases where mobile phones have been very helpful in the BOP realm, specifically because mobile phones and ICT can provide the lowest possible cost in terms of implementing services. So 3 examples here, 3 very simple examples. Indian farmers looking at weather information and crop prices to take things to the market. South African HIV patients looking at when to get their checkups. Food distribution programs. I've even heard people look at satellite imagery to see where the best fishing places are. Here's another good example. This is an example in India, where 70% of the population lives in rural areas, yet 70% of doctors live in the cities. How do we connect them? Another one that I was tangentially involved in was the 1 lap per child one, where the design goals, after many trial and error, this is probably like, the 100th version, but the point here is what those various issues are locally. And they had to try that and figure out all of these independently. So, getting into the other part that I want to talk about, and this really then closes with Japan, but the other advantages of this is, okay, the importance of doing this kind of work. And it ties into future, and it ties into what I call trickle up. Up to now, the traditional model of technology is that it was trickle down. Rich nations got their iPhones, and then 5, 10 years later, people have cell phones or features similar to that. It trickles down, and it goes especially down this pyramid of usage. However, lately, there have been numerous examples where things trickle up, meaning developments happen in the development market first, and that the Western world is looking at ideas from that area in terms of making their business plans and products more efficient. 2 examples. Future of money. This is very interesting. I didn't actually know this, but the first thing, and I'm going to skip to this, the 3rd bullet point here, is that 90% of the world's populations actually don't use banks. And so money is definitely something difficult to exchange. The ones that do, there's costs and various things involved. But India's ICIC created a system where it's a 1/10 of the cost of doing a bank transaction. And then furthermore, because of this, and doing monies and paying exchanges and regular banking, people starting in Kenya and going to the rest of Africa can use cell phones to pay for things and give each other money. So, good examples of ICT. Now, I now skip to more of the conclusion since I only have a few minutes left. One thing that I feel, and it will tie into the next slide, is that for Japan, I feel that to make DLAB and this type of thinking more effective, we need younger people, students, university people to go out abroad and to interact and do things with local people. And while this slide is not specifically indicative of this is the best slide I can find, plus I used it in my class, so it's easy to use. But it shows statistically the trend here in terms of the number of Japanese people that go out overseas from Japan. And so it's a disturbing percentage nonetheless. And from my perspective, I see that in conclusion, Japan is really the situation where I'm glad to see all these people. And what I want to leave as a message is for everybody to think globally and act locally so that by doing so, and BOPSI, the Japanese corporations and people you work for in corporations or manufacturing companies in Japan, I'm sure many of you will, really need to think about globally relevant products. And what I mean by that is to understand what the world needs, not what it wants. So it's a want-need argument. And I think there are very few products in Japan that really think about what the actual need is of the world. And also, when designing these products, find out what the local limitations are. I've seen technologies where they would do water filtration, yet find out that they don't have electricity to power the pumps.